Holden asked about Edmund's business records on his second visit to my house. I remember thinking, well, he's a financial planner. Of course he asks about these things. It's what they do. By the fourth visit, he had asked about the property deed, the estate settlement timeline, and whether I'd considered a simplified asset transfer to make things easier for Callie down the line. I kept smiling and kept saying we'd have to talk about that another time. I kept telling myself I was being a suspicious old woman who didn't know how to accept kindness. Then, at my daughter's engagement party, while 68 people raised their champagne glasses and Holden stood ready to give his toast, Callie pressed a folded cocktail napkin into my palm. 4 words. Mom, stop the toast. I had 30 seconds to decide what kind of woman I was going to be. Thank you for being here. If stories about protecting family, trusting your instincts, and refusing to let anyone quietly dismantle what someone you loved spent a lifetime building. If those stories matter to you, I hope you'll subscribe to Opal Revenge and stay with me through this one. It is the hardest and the most important story I have ever told. My husband Edmund died 18 months before any of this happened. He went the way he always said he hoped to, quickly, without drama, without burdening anyone. He was 67 years old and had never spent a night in a hospital in his adult life, and then one Tuesday afternoon, his heart simply stopped while he was sitting in his workshop at the edge of our backyard in upstate New York. When I went out to call him in for dinner, he was already gone. We had been married 41 years. He was the quietest person I have ever known, in the best possible sense. Not distant, not cold, but genuinely at ease with silence, in a way that took me a full decade of marriage to understand was its own form of generosity. He built things. Furniture, mostly, custom pieces he sold out of a small shop for 20 years, before the business grew too large and he had to stop making things himself and start managing people who did. He built contracts after that, and client relationships, and eventually sold the company for more than either of us had expected. He never told people the figures. He drove the same truck for 14 years. When our daughter Callie was growing up, she thought we were solidly middle class. She wasn't wrong about how we lived. She just didn't know the whole picture. Edmund used to say that visible wealth was an invitation. He said it with the mild certainty of a man who had watched his own father lose a business to a partner who had seen an opening and moved through it. He was right. I understand that now with the particular sharpness that comes from learning a lesson the hardest way, even when someone you loved already taught it to you gently. Callie had always been careful with men. One difficult relationship in her mid-20s, a man who turned out to be dishonest in small, corrosive ways, had made her slow to trust, and I respected that in her. So when she called me on a Friday evening in April, voice lit up like something new had been switched on, and said, "Mom, I met someone, and I think this one might actually be real." I sat down at the kitchen table, where Edmund and I had eaten breakfast for 26 years, and I felt something I hadn't felt since he died. Hope is the right word for it. His name was Holden Briggs. He was 36, worked in financial planning, lived in the same city where Callie had her design practice. They had met at a dinner party through mutual friends and had been seeing each other for 2 months before she mentioned him to me, which was very Callie. She tended to know a thing was true before she said it out loud. He came to the house for the first time in May. He was tall, well-dressed without being showy, with the easy confidence of a man who had never had to work particularly hard to be liked. He shook my hand with both of his and said he had heard so much about Edmund, what a remarkable man he must have been, how much he was clearly still missed. I appreciated that. A lot of people step carefully around Edmund's name with me now, as if grief is a subject requiring careful management. After dinner, we sat on the back porch, and he asked about the workshop at the edge of the yard. The timber frame building Edmund had built himself in 1998, where he'd spent every weekend of the last 30 years of his life. I told him Edmund had built it board by board. Holden nodded and looked out at the property and said the countryside up this way had come into its own in the last decade, that land values in the area had climbed significantly. He said it the way people say things they've rehearsed to sound unrehearsed. I thought, he's a financial planner. It's how they see the world. I was right that it was how he saw the world. I was wrong about almost everything else. The second visit was Christmas. Callie came home for 4 days and brought him, and we spent 2 evenings cooking and watching old movies on Edmund's couch, and it was the least lonely Christmas I had experienced since the first one after Edmund died. Holden was warm with Callie in ways I watched for specifically. The way he treated her when he thought no one was assessing him, and what I saw seemed real enough. On the third evening, after she went upstairs to call a friend, he asked about Edmund's estate, casually the way people ask about things they've been thinking about for a while. He said he knew probate could get complicated, that a lot of widows ended up with assets in transition, longer than necessary, that his firm specialized in simplifying exactly that kind of situation. I said my attorney had handled everything, and it was all well in order. He said, of course. He said my attorney was lucky to have such an organized client. Third visit, February. He asked to see the property deed. We were standing in the kitchen, and he made it sound like a passing thought. Fourth visit, early March. He offered to connect me with someone at his firm who could help structure what he called a preliminary transfer document. He said it would be a gift to Callie, a way of ensuring she wouldn't have to navigate complicated legal terrain in the future. He said it almost tenderly, like a man who worried about my daughter's well-being. That phrase, preliminary transfer document, was when the alarm inside me stopped being quiet. A preliminary transfer document, offered by a man who was engaged but not yet married, who had no legal relationship to me or my estate, who was volunteering without being asked to help move my assets somewhere more accessible, to someone. I smiled and said I'd think about it. Then I waited until his car was down the driveway, and I called Jeanette. She had handled Edmund's estate through probate, sharp, unhurried, the kind of attorney who uses silence the way other lawyers use arguments. I told her everything. The questions, the phrasing, the 4 visits, and what had been asked in each one. I told her I was probably being a paranoid old woman. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How long has Callie known him?" 9 months, engaged after 7. "Give me 10 days, she said. She called back in 8 and asked me to come to the office. She drew the blinds when I arrived, which she had never done before. That told me everything before she opened the folder. Holden Briggs held a financial planning license issued in 2020 by a certification body that had dissolved in 2019. The Social Security number on his New York State registration traced back to a man who had died in Georgia in 2011. His professional employment history, beyond a general website with no verifiable staff, did not exist in any system Jeanette's researcher could locate. His real name was Travis Allen Colby. I had to hold the edge of her desk. Jeanette had found 2 prior cases. The first, Atlanta, 2019. Travis had spent 5 months dating the daughter of a recently widowed woman, gradually inserting himself into conversations about the family estate. The woman's brother grew suspicious and retained a lawyer. Travis disappeared 3 weeks into the investigation. The family paid $60,000 for his signature on a non-disclosure agreement. No charges. The second, Central Pennsylvania, 2021. A widow in her late 60s, her adult daughter, and a man operating under yet another name. Same progression. Charm. Patience. The patient introduction of financial topics into casual conversation. The slow turn toward documentation. The woman's son-in-law recognized the pattern. Travis was gone before anything formal was filed. $80,000. No charges. Both women had lived modestly. Both had lost their husbands within the 2 years prior. Both had assets that were not visible from the outside. He researches his targets before he ever makes contact, Jeanette said. Probate filings are public record. Business sale announcements in local papers. Property assessments. He built a picture of your estate before he walked through your door. I thought about Edmund, about Holden standing at the back window on that first evening, looking at the workshop. Edmund's company incorporation papers were filed in this county. The business sale had been reported briefly in the local business journal. The probate of his estate was public record. Travis Colby could have found most of the outline of our life in an afternoon. And then I thought about Callie, about the way she said his name. Jeanette gave me the name of a private investigator, Virgil, who had spent 22 years in state law enforcement before going independent. He came to the house the following week in a car the color of concrete, moved through my rooms with a quiet attention that reminded me, oddly, of Edmund. The way Edmund could walk into a space and immediately understand its structure. Virgil installed 4 cameras. He was careful and specific about the legal framework for each one, the chain of custody protocols, the encrypted backup servers. He said, "Whatever we capture will hold up," he said. "These men have a specific move. All we have to do is give him the opportunity to make it." 3 days later, Dr. Quimby called. She had been my physician for 12 years. She communicated in precise sentences and did not make unnecessary calls. She told me that 5 weeks earlier, a man identifying himself as my future son-in-law had come to her office. He had described episodes of confusion and disorientation that he claimed to have witnessed firsthand. He had asked about the early indicators of cognitive decline. He had asked, specifically, what documentation would be required to establish that a patient was no longer capable of managing her own legal affairs. Dr. Quimby said she had thanked him, walked him out, and immediately reviewed my complete file for the past 12 years. She could not find a single notation, not one, that supported anything he had described. "I have been practicing medicine for 30 years, she said. "I know the difference between a worried family member and someone conducting reconnaissance. I am not willing to be used as part of what he's building." I sat in Edmund's chair after the call and looked at the workshop through the back window and understood, fully, what Travis Colby intended to do. He wasn't only trying to take what Edmund had built. He was trying to erase me in order to do it, to construct on paper with a compliant physician that my judgment could not be trusted, that my refusals could be set aside. He was building the architecture of my disappearance from my own life, quietly and patiently, with the ease of someone who had done it before. We set the trap 3 weeks later. I called Holden and said he had been right. It was past time to get things organized. I had documents from Edmund I'd never fully understood, and I could use a professional eye. I said it shyly, the way he would expect. He agreed immediately. 2 o'clock the following Thursday. I left a real folder on the coffee table. An accurate estate summary Jeanette had prepared, figures precise to the dollar, and excused myself to rest upstairs. I watched from the tablet Virgil had left me. Holden sat down, opened the folder, took out his phone. He photographed every page. Then he walked to the back window and made a call, and the microphone Virgil had placed in the lamp on the side table caught every word with the clarity of a voice in a quiet room. He said I was sitting on more than he'd estimated. He named the house value, the commercial real estate account from Edmund's business that had been untouched for 2 years, the investment portfolio. He named a total. Then he said, "I need Callie to push her on the preliminary transfer before the party." Before the party, you understand me? Once I have the POA in hand, it doesn't matter how sharp she thinks she is. I sat on the edge of the bed upstairs and listened to the man my daughter loved describe her as a mechanism. Jeanette had the recording by that evening. By the end of the week, she had reached the 2 prior families, who agreed to provide formal statements now that criminal charges were in motion. Sheriff Beaumont a measured man who had known Edmund personally, was briefed and agreed to be present at the engagement party in civilian clothes. Dr. Quimby would attend as a guest. We had everything. What none of us had planned for was Callie. 2 days before the party, she came home an hour early from a client meeting. She told me later that she heard Holden's voice from the apartment hallway, low, the tone of a conversation not meant to be overhead, and she stopped and she listened. She heard her mother's name. She heard the phrase power of attorney in a context that made the bottom fall out of the previous 9 months of her life. She didn't call me. She didn't say a word to him. For 48 hours, she performed the role of the happy woman planning her party, and she carried that knowledge in her chest like a weight, and she did not let it show. I did not know any of this when I watched her move through the living room on the night of the party, warm, laughing, moving between guests, as if everything were exactly as it should be. I thought she was simply happy. I did not know she was giving the performance of her life. The champagne had been poured. Holden was smoothing his jacket lapels, beginning to reach for his glass to call for attention. The room was settling into the particular, expectant quiet of a toast about to be made. Callie passed me near the bookshelf at the back of the room. She didn't look at me. She pressed something into my palm and kept walking, without breaking stride. A cocktail napkin, folded twice. Mom stopped the toast. I stood there for 3 seconds. Edmund's furniture around me, Edmund's floors under my feet. 68 people who had come here to celebrate something that was not what it appeared to be. Then I set down my glass and walked to the center of the room. Before we toast, I said, I need everyone's attention for just a moment. The room went quiet. Holden looked at me. I watched something shift behind his eyes, not alarm yet, only recalculation. Virgil had connected the laptop to the television before guests arrived. I opened it now. The recording played through the room speakers. Holden's voice, unhurried and specific, naming the accounts and the timeline, and what he intended to accomplish before this party took place. No one spoke, no one moved. When it finished, I said, his name is not Holden Briggs. His real name is Travis Allen Colby. He has done this before to families in Georgia and in Pennsylvania, both of whom paid him to disappear quietly. I am not going to pay him to disappear. Jeanette stood from her chair. Dr. Quimby stood. Virgil stepped out from the back hallway with the documentation, background records, prior case statements, the photographs Travis had taken of my estate documents on his phone that afternoon 3 weeks ago. Travis turned to the room. I watched him reach for the performance, the reasonable man wrongly accused, the wounded almost son-in-law, and he was practiced at it. He was good. He opened his mouth. Sheriff Beaumont came in from the kitchen doorway. The handcuffs, the door, the sound of it closing. It was over in under 2 minutes. Callie found me at the back window. She slid her hand into mine without saying anything, and we stood there looking out at the yard, at Edmund's workshop, at the light going long and gold across the grass in the way it does on autumn evenings up here, that I have never been able to adequately describe. I should have called you the minute I heard it, she said. You got there, I told her. That's what matters. Travis Colby was convicted 8 months later on 2 felony counts of fraud and 1 count of conspiracy to commit financial elder abuse. He received 4 years. His associate, the person he had been calling from my living room, who had researched targets and constructed his cover identities, received a separate sentence. Both prior families provided testimony. Neither of them had pressed charges before. They did now. Callie took time, more time than either of us expected, and that is all right. You do not move through that kind of betrayal on a schedule. She saw a therapist twice a week through the winter. She started cooking again, which she had stopped doing at some point during the relationship, without either of us noticing. She took a trip out west to see college friends she had let drift. Last spring, she came to the house on a Saturday morning with her car full of plants and started digging along the south wall of Edmund's workshop without asking me. Tomatoes, basil, sunflowers in a long row along the fence. It was the exact thing Edmund did whenever he needed to work something through, find a task with clear physical logic, and let the mind sort itself out. I watched her from the kitchen window and I thought about instinct. About the quiet, steady alarm that had started going off. The second time, Holden asked about Edmund's estate, the one I had very nearly talked myself out of because I wanted my daughter to have found something good. 35 years at a reference desk teaches you things no degree program covers. Students who were lying, students who were in trouble, students who needed something they didn't have the words for yet. You learn, eventually, that the question someone is asking you is almost never the real question. You learn to listen for what's underneath it. Edmund understood that. He said once that the most dangerous people aren't the loud ones. They're the patient ones who ask the right things and wait. He built this house and this life carefully, without advertisement, for reasons that had nothing to do with display. He wanted us to have what we needed, including the means to defend it if the moment came. Wealth is not about what you can show. It is about what you can protect when it matters. If there is one thing I would ask you to take from this, if you have a parent living alone, an aunt you've lost track of, a neighbor who is newly bereaved, check in. The people who mean to do harm are prepared, and they are patient, and they are very good at seeming kind. The only thing that stops them is someone paying closer attention than they are, and being willing to be inconvenient when it counts. I was inconvenient. I am glad every single day that I was. Callie is well. The sunflowers she planted came back on their own this year. She says that means the soil is good, and she intends to add to the garden in the spring. I believe her. I believe in what grows back.